Alright, I'm starting out today's garden update here in front of my primary winter squash patch because I want to talk a little bit about a problem that I've been running into with these that's admittedly a bit disappointing and frustrating. Even though the foliage here is looking tremendously healthy, having recovered from early season whitefly damage, and the plants are really filling in the trellis that I built for them to the point where I had to make some extensions to give the vines a little extra room. So far, these 5 plants, this mass of 5 plants, has only definitively set this one fruit right here. Most of the female fruits that these plants have produced so far will either turn yellow and drop off like this one here before they can even open for pollination. Alternatively, the flower will open and then it will grow for a few days to maybe even a couple of weeks and get to be the size of a large grape or maybe even a golf ball, but eventually it turns yellow, shrivels up, and dies. Now, I know that these ones weren't the victim of poor pollination because I actually take the time and effort to hand pollinate my winter squash because it's a easy and kind of relaxing thing to do. So I'm kind of hard pressed to figure out exactly what is causing so many spontaneous fruit abortions like this. Unfortunately, the hours of internet research I conducted did not reveal a definitive reason for this problem. Ultimately, it boils down to plant stress. Now, there are, of course, a number of things that can cause plant stress. Insufficient watering, that's, the first thing that I looked at, but the plants never showed any signs of underwatering. They haven't really wilted, due to sunlight or heat in quite some time, since I put the shade cloth up. Um, it's easy to blame the heat because, we've been having at least one triple-digit day per week for the last couple of weeks now, and that's not good for pollen, no matter how you slice it. But you can't really blame the heat because I know for a fact we have giant pumpkin farms and winter squash farms here in the Sacramento Valley. And every year, in spite of our tremendous summers, they do fine. So I'm not sure that heat can really be blamed in this situation. What I am thinking is that it is just too small of an area for this many large, very hungry plants. I'm thinking that maybe I just haven't fertilized sufficiently and the plants can't maintain the fruit that they're developing. I'm not too worried about it in terms of getting a decent harvest of winter squash. It's disappointing and frustrating. Anytime you put in a lot of work into your garden or a given plant and it starts aborting fruit, that sucks. But my front yard squash garden is doing actually much better in spite of being in full blazing sun most of the day. And also, I have a lot of different varieties of bush varieties of squash that just seem to do a lot better. And they have a quick turnaround time, a quick yield time that I can plant in the shoulder season, between the end of most of my spring summer garden and before the frost arrives if I really need to. What I think I'm just going to be leaning toward in the future is sticking with the bush variety squash that I know do well in my tiny little location here. I have had good years with large sprawling vining squashes and trellising them, but it seems just like it's really hit or miss whether I can get the plants to yield. So I think that the best choice for me in my small backyard garden moving forward in the future, and I'm saying this as a reference to myself as a reminder, next year, don't bother with giant plant vining squashes. It's just a recipe for potential heartbreak. So future me, bush squash only. All right, so like I said before, the front yard squash garden is actually doing really well, so let's go take a quick look at that. All right, out here in my newly installed front yard garden, the plants are doing way better than I expected, especially since everything is in what is still, fairly heavy clay soil, and there's no shade cloth, and it gets full hot sun, up until like 7 o'clock at night. The sunflowers here are a little stunted; they're in full bloom, even though that they're only, 3 feet tall. And that, of course, is the effect of the heavy clay soil that I think is stunting the roots a bit. Now, this extra black futsu squash, which is a machada variety, basically a kind of butternut squash, even though the plant itself looks like it's taken a beating, it's started to set some, really nice fruit. I have 3 or 4 of these on the vine that are definitely going to make it and ripen up. which is a really odd thing because the plants out back, the plants themselves are looking lush and beautiful, but they can't set fruit to save their lives. This plant itself is beat to hell, but there's a lot of fruit on it. So maybe there's a lesson in that somewhere. I have no idea what this particular squash plant is. It came from a package of bush variety butternut squash, butterbush. It's definitely not that. The leaf shape has it as some kind of peppo, which are typically your summer squashes, zucchinis, etc. But the shape of the fruit that it is setting is not like any summer squash that I'm aware of, possibly spaghetti squash. However, my money is on some kind of miniature pie pumpkin. A number of those orange pumpkins are actually a Peppo variety as opposed to a Maxima or Machada. And moving on to the butterbush themselves, I'm really excited. They're setting quite a bit of fruit already. And I know from experience that these butterbush squash do amazingly well in our super hot climate and in compact spaces where presumably they just don't chew the same amount of resources as the sprawling vining variety of squashes. So this is really encouraging here. Everything is doing better than I expected for a brand new garden bed in largely our naturally occurring soil, which is, hot garbage. All right, let's move on to the tomato report part of this video. And because let's face it, tomatoes really are the star of pretty much any spring or summer garden, assuming one lives in a place where you can actually grow tomatoes. The harvest is really starting to come in. I've been picking them and harvesting them very steadily now for a couple of weeks. I'm going to get to a point soon, actually, where it's going to be a little bit overwhelming to keep on top of it all. That's by design. So I can't complain there. Unfortunately, blossom end rot has started to rear its ugly head to a degree in my sauce tomatoes. Now, while the ideal amount of blossom end rot on a tomato plant is obviously none, I'll point out that this particular variety of paste tomato, the Rio Grande, is tremendously resistant to blossom end rot. I find the occasional handful of affected fruits. When I grew San Marzanos and Romas, however, I was losing maybe a quarter to a third of all fruits that developed to blossom end rot. So this is still a great variety of paste tomato. Something interesting I'm noticing about blossom end rot on my particular tomato plants is the lower on the plant the fruit is, the first ones to develop for the season, not only are those less prone to blossom end rot than later fruits, but also they're bigger and just healthier looking overall. So this is leaving me wondering if instead of a calcium uptake issue within the plant itself, I'm starting to wonder if in my situation, there in fact is a calcium deficiency in the soil. Could it be that earlier in the season there are more available nutrients in the soil and that I haven't been feeding quite adequately enough given the number of plants in a small area, so they're kind of running out of food as the season goes on and newer fruits develop? So, while conventional wisdom is that blossom end rot is the result of a calcium deficiency, it's not necessarily an issue with calcium content in the soil. 9 times out of 10, blossom end rot is due to a calcium uptake issue. Some kind of plant stress prevents the plant from getting calcium into the fruit when it needs to. Sometimes it's water stress, it could be temperature stress. But in my case, I'm wondering if it is in fact a deficiency in the soil, only because these are raised beds, and raised beds are kind of soil islands. There's not a lot coming into them naturally. So I'm wondering if, because I have so many plants in a, for lack of a better term, confined space, if the plants are indeed using up their available calcium. I wouldn't be able to know this for sure without conducting soil tests. I would ultimately have to conduct a test on each individual bed, and I have like 12 to 15 of them at last count. So that could be very pricey to have, send away one sample from each to a lab. So I'm wondering, the next time I do a round of tomatoes, my plan is just to apply a calcium-heavy fertilizer at the point when the plants are in full blossom, and see if that's sufficient to nip any blossom end rot in the bud. So we'll have to see moving forward. I'm actually going to be planting out a full second crop of tomatoes this year. It's looking like my Rio Grande tomatoes are going to be done producing sometime in July or August. And I would suspect that my determinate plants, my slicing tomatoes, will have done what they're going to do by sometime in August. That's going to leave a lot of time. There's a lot of time between August and the first frost, and I bet if I do everything right, I can sneak in a full second crop of tomatoes before the frost that usually arrives in November. So on my second round of tomatoes, I'm just going to, as a precautionary measure, apply like a CalMag, or maybe a little bit of calcium nitrate fertilizer when the plants are in full bloom, and see if that is enough to eliminate all blossom end rot in sauce tomatoes. I'll have to see. It's kind of an experiment I'm looking forward to, so we'll see how that one goes. Blossom end rot issues notwithstanding, my Rio Grande paste tomatoes are doing really well and continue to be my best ever performer in the category of sauce and paste tomato. It's only mid-June as I record this, and I've already harvested 15 pounds of these, and as you can see, there are plenty more left on the vines. And they're starting to ripen up a lot more rapidly now that our weather has cooled back off for a few days. Extreme temperatures, 90s and 100s, will slow ripening, but when things cool back off into the 70s and 80s, it's going to start to be a real trick to keep ahead of these and get everything harvested, with all the other obligations I have. But that is a good problem to have. You can also probably see that I have let these go when it comes to trellising and staking. We've had a tremendously windy spring and summer here, and it's just been wreaking havoc on my inexpensive twine and stake tomato wrangling job. I wouldn't let this happen if I lived in a more wet climate where it can be just an absolute death sentence to allow tomato plants or fruits to touch the ground. But here in dry Sacramento, where we won't see rain until November, I'm just going to let them ride. All right, here we have one of my two indeterminate slicing tomatoes that I'm growing this year. This is new to us. It's called the Virginia Sweet. I got it through Sandia Seeds, if anybody's interested. They're not paying me to say that, of course. But the first one of these actually ripened up over the weekend, and we were able to taste test, and it's excellent. Very low acid tomato, sweet, but not overpoweringly sweet. I wouldn't can with these just because the acid is so low. It's almost, there's almost no tanginess to it whatsoever. So it's a very sweet, mild flavor that I think will be perfect for a variety of sandwiches and burgers, stuff like that. It seems to be a bit low on the production side. In the future, if I grow these again, which I probably will, I'm going to allow more than probably 3 to 4 productive stems. It might make the fruits a little smaller, but there will be more of them. And our tried and true heirloom slicer variety, the Cherokee Purple. These are going gangbusters this year with these just nice loaded trusses of large fruit. Very gratifying to see these developing. They're starting to ripen probably at a rate where we're not going to be able to eat all of these fresh. I do love the taste of a Cherokee Purple, but my attention span when it comes to food isn't such that I can eat raw tomatoes every day for weeks on end. But the good part is that while they're a little more work to seed than a specific paste variety tomato, Cherokee Purples do make a really, really flavorful sauce. So that's what's going to happen to a lot of these. And here's my complete mess of a cherry tomato bed. These are all determinates this year. And like my Rio Grandes, I've at this point let them fall over to do their own thing. It doesn't seem to be hurting production or plant health any at this point. The yellow ones are a variety from Botanical Interests called Patio Choice. They're a great bush variety cherry that produces quite well. The other variety I have going of determinate bush tomato here is called Baxter's Bush Champion. Will not be growing these again. While the flavor is fine, the skins on these are unpleasantly tough and thick. So eating these in like a salad is just not a great experience in terms of texture. All right, briefly in other June garden highlights, most plants are now starting to produce at least a little bit. Like here is my Boston pickling cucumber. There's one that is now just about ready to be harvested. By the time I post this, this will probably be a jar of pickles. My Armenian cucumber plants have really started to take off, which that always happens when the extreme heat really rolls in. This is one of the few plants I could probably grow without any sort of shade cloth over it whatsoever. I have the first one of these that started to form. It's a little funky looking. I'm wondering if there might have been a pollination issue on it. Some of these they do tend to take on that weird bird head shape at one end, but it doesn't ever really affect flavor. And I don't care about how things look before I eat them personally, so we're good there. And my asparagus beans, again, a real good hot weather staple crop that is now starting to take off. Very close in flavor to most standard green beans and string beans. As you can see here, I've already got the first pair of actual beans forming. When these are about, a foot long, I will pick them. And we've got some eggplant, actually. This is a variety called Orient Express. I'm not sure that these are going to get any bigger. They feel pretty ripe and ready to be picked, but I do know that it is a small but heat-tolerant variety of eggplant. So I thought it was kind of neat that my sweet potato plants have started to flower. I've grown sweet potatoes now for, I'd say, 3 or 4 years here in Sacramento. I've never had them flower before, and it's a really pretty flower, so I'm hoping to get more of these as the season goes on. All right, that about does it for my June garden journal. That's what I'm calling these little updates now. I'm definitely going to have a ton of harvesting and probably canning to do over the upcoming weeks. Once again, I appreciate everybody who tuned in to listen to me ramble on about my backyard garden. And until next time, let's hope it all doesn't die.